Sam Bankman-Fried had this whole thread last night about stocks, Bitcoin, war, etc. He basically talked about, it makes sense that stocks are down in the kind of very immediate term. Bitcoin as well. People are selling things to get cash, uncertainty,
liquidity,
all of that, liquidity, etc. But he also talked about, let's start with destabilizing Eastern European currencies and the Eastern European financial systems, which means that they might look for alternatives. If you were in Ukraine right now, where would you trust your money? So that was one of his early points. And I think this is really fascinating because ultimately we usually think about people seeking alternatives to their local currency because of undisciplined monetary and fiscal policy. Mm-hmm. Your currency's failing. Shit, I got to get something else. I want dollars. I can't get dollars for whatever reason. My bank's going to confiscate it. It's dangerous in the black market. It's expensive, whatever.
Totally.
Screw it. What's on the internet? Let me go do something there. Or let me get physical gold. Hope somebody doesn't confiscate it as I'm leaving, whatever.
Yeah, totally.
When you start thinking about it from a war perspective, when you start thinking about it from literally is my government going to be around? There's reports all morning that Russian forces are trying to literally take the government. They're trying to install new leadership. They're trying to take over the Chernobyl plant. This is like an invasion of. On the invasion scale, this is like true invasion, right?
This is real. Yeah,
this isn't like, hey, we shot some rockets and did we do something?
No, they drove tanks to the Capitol.
Yes, correct. And so it does beg the question of okay, if you're one of the thousands of people that we pulled up that are literally leaving Kiev, what do you do with your wealth? Do you leave it in a Ukrainian bank? Do you put some gold in the trunk and hope to God no one stops you? Do you hope that you have enough physical cash to put in your pocket and that you prepared for this situation? These are real things. And if you're sitting there thinking about this, it's not that, I'm going to get rich with Bitcoin. Whether it's stable coins, Bitcoin, whatever asset, there's a very real consequence to having these assets now or an advantage to having them.
Yeah. So starters, obviously digital assets are a cheap and not cheap, certainly an effective solution for people in these trying times. I'm not sure that everybody in Ukraine at this particular juncture has the ability to remove their money out of banks and put them in digital asset space. But to the extent that you're already trapped in that financial system, buy stocks. The blue chip Ukrainian businesses, and that may be an oxymoron. I'm not too familiar with how rocking and rolling Ukraine's economy normally is, but to the extent that there are blue chip businesses, like the best grocery store in Ukraine, the Uber of Ukraine, all those kinds of companies, they're not going anywhere. They're still going to operate and exist. They might be under different leadership. They might be under Putin's buddy running the company in 6 months, but they're still going to be generating capital, generating profits, and ultimately servicing the Ukraine economy. So if I would be much more concerned about having money in physical Ukrainian dollars. What's their currency? Ukrainian zlotny or yeah. So yeah, I don't know how the hell I knew that. That's ridiculous.
It's because you're smart.
Yeah. Well, I'm such a nerd. Anyway, but no, you don't want your money in the local currency. So clearly stocks tend to inflate when there's a hyperinflation episode, which again, hyperinflation in my book or in a lot of economist books is defined by a loss of confidence in the currency. Not necessarily by a certain level or threshold of inflation, but rather an actual absolute collapse in the currency. And you could see a collapse in the currency if the regime was to change, or if there was a fear that the regime was going to change, right? And so you definitely going to buy assets that Russians themselves with Russian rubles would want to buy. That would be the best trade.
John, before you ask your question, John Kerry gave an interview, I guess, this morning, and he said, I hope that Vladimir Putin helps us stay on track for our climate goals. It's
wow, geez Louise, man.
That's, that wasn't on the bingo card.
Not at all.
What questions do you have?
Yeah, I agree that Ukrainian businesses, the infrastructure will be there no matter the leadership. They will eventually come somewhat relative back to normal, whoever's in power. The country itself, though, will operate.
Yeah, totally.
What do people around the world, talk about U.S., Ukraine citizens, Russian, obviously everyone's very fearful right now, right? Buying, they don't know what's going to happen in the future with the stock market. Is it right to be fearful, or is this the time where, hey, kind of be greedy when others are fearful and vice versa? It's okay to be fearful right now, or what are your thoughts around that?
I tend to think that fear and greed are two emotions that cause you to lose the most money in financial markets. So generally speaking, if you can, obviously it's impossible because we're all human, right? We all make more decisions that we need to make in terms of risk managing our portfolios and things of that nature. But I think it's best to just make calculated bets based on where we are in these various cycles. Again, there's geopolitics, which is hard to ever truly handicap and gauge. Yeah. But you can understand where you are in the growth cycle. You can understand where you are in the inflation cycle. You can understand where you are in the monetary and fiscal policy cycles. And then also you can understand where you are in the valuation cycle. And all of those cycles right now, all 5 of them, are moving in the wrong direction. And so to me, I think if you're saying sort of there's blood in the streets over a long enough time horizon, risk assets, stocks, crypto, all this stuff goes up in price over time. One, because there's an expansion in the money supply, but more importantly, there's an expansion of the human supply. And obviously we're going to create economic activity and economic growth just as a function of, having babies and, being alive and advances in medicine. And so that stuff, if you have a long enough time horizon, it's always a great time to buy. An all-time high is a great time to buy if you have a long enough time horizon. But the problem is, most people, particularly people at or near retirement, cannot afford to suffer material drawdowns. And this is where the whole concept of risk management comes into play. It's not about people who can, hodl Bitcoin for 20, 30 years, which is what most people should be doing, obviously. It's about the people the reason we see selling ever is the people who cannot afford a big drawdown, get nervous about their asset allocation and start to make decisions that broadly impact financial markets. And so that's what we're dealing with now. That's what we'll be dealing with for the rest of human time until we have some sort of universal, I'm certainly not advocating this, so don't shoot me, some sort of like universal retirement program or basic income, but obviously we're probably, that's many, 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 many years away from occurring in the US, if ever.
So have enough money to weather the storm, essentially, right? And time.
Yeah, and most people do not, right? The average person does not, right? The average person is a lot richer than they were prior to the pandemic. But I think inflation has taken a real big bite out of that for the median to below median consumer from an income perspective. So, but I think we're probably, for a lot of people, we're worse off than where we started. And for a lot of people, we're slightly better off and getting less better off by the day in terms of declines in asset prices.